What if I told you that one of the most powerful healing substances on the planet is sitting inside a bottle on a store shelf right now, ignored, underestimated, and profoundly misunderstood, while pharmaceutical companies have spent billions of dollars trying to replicate what it does naturally? What if I told you that for older adults specifically, rubbing just a small amount of this oil on your skin every single night before sleep could do something that most medications cannot? Not just mask pain, not just temporarily reduce inflammation, but actually signal your body's own stem cells to wake up, regenerate tissue, and in some laboratory studies, trigger the natural death of cancer cells. I know that sounds almost too extraordinary to be true. I thought the same thing the first time I encountered this research. But I have spent more than 3 decades in medicine, and the data on this is real, it is peer-reviewed, and it is something that every older adult in this country deserves to know about. I am Dr. William Lee, and welcome back to this channel. If you are watching for the first time, this is a place where we cut through the noise and talk about what the science actually says, not what pharmaceutical marketing budgets want you to believe. Today, we are going to go deep into a topic that I believe is one of the most underreported stories in senior health: the profound, multidimensional healing effects of a specific oil applied topically to aging skin, and why the nighttime hours are absolutely essential for making this work. Stay with me until the end because I am going to explain exactly the mechanism by which this works in the body, which specific oil I am talking about and why it is unique, what the clinical research actually demonstrates, and how to use it correctly so that you get the maximum benefit. Let us start by talking about what happens to skin as it ages, because most people do not realize how dramatically the skin changes after 60 and why those changes have consequences that go far beyond appearance. Your skin is not simply a protective shell, it is the largest organ in your body, and it is a living, dynamic interface between your internal biological systems and the external world. It is filled with receptors, nerve endings, immune cells, lymphatic channels, and something called transdermal pathways, microscopic channels through which certain molecules can actually pass directly into the bloodstream and reach internal organs. Now here is what aging does to all of that. After the age of 60, the skin's collagen production falls approximately 1 to 2% every single year. The dermal layer, the deeper structural layer of the skin, begins to thin. The density of fibroblasts, the cells responsible for producing collagen and elastin, declines. The sebaceous glands that produce natural skin oils become less active, reducing the skin's natural barrier function and its ability to retain moisture. The turnover rate of epidermal cells slows from approximately 28 days in a young adult to 45 to 60 days in an adult over 60, meaning the skin's capacity to repair and renew itself at the surface is significantly impaired. The microvasculature of the skin, the tiny capillaries that deliver oxygen and nutrients to the skin cells and remove metabolic waste, becomes less dense as vessels are resorbed without being replaced. And the Langerhans cells, the immune sentinels in the skin that are part of the innate immune surveillance system, decline in number by up to 50% between young adulthood and age 70, reducing the skin's local immune defense capacity. The consequence of all of these converging changes is a skin that is thinner, drier, more permeable to irritants and pathogens, more vulnerable to oxidative damage, slower to repair, and less capable of performing its systemic functions as an immunological and sensory organ. And crucially, many of these changes also directly impair the transdermal delivery pathway, the skin's capacity to absorb topically applied compounds into the systemic circulation. A 30-year-old skin is a relatively efficient transdermal delivery system. A 70-year-old skin with a compromised barrier and thinned dermis is actually paradoxically both more vulnerable to inappropriate absorption of irritants and more responsive to beneficial bioactive compounds that are formulated correctly for transdermal delivery. This last point is the biological foundation of everything I am going to tell you today. The aging skin, despite being compromised in many respects, can actually be a more efficient delivery vehicle for the right oil, applied in the right way at the right time, than younger skin would be. Now let me tell you which oil I am talking about, and then I am going to spend the majority of this conversation explaining the science in the depth that it deserves. The oil is black seed oil, Nigella sativa oil. It is pressed from the seeds of the Nigella sativa plant, which has been used medicinally for over 2,000 years across multiple cultures and is referenced in texts ranging from ancient Egyptian medical papyri to early Islamic medicine. The Prophet Muhammad reportedly described it as a cure for everything except death. For centuries, that claim seemed like folk tradition, Then modern analytical chemistry arrived, and researchers began identifying exactly what was in this oil at the molecular level. What they found has produced one of the most active bodies of research in natural compound pharmacology of the last 2 decades. The primary bioactive compound in black seed oil is thymoquinone, a ketone that constitutes approximately 30 to 48% of the volatile oil fraction of Nigella sativa seeds. Thymoquinone is not a novel compound to the pharmaceutical world. It has been studied in hundreds of peer-reviewed publications since the 1960s, with research accelerating dramatically in the last 20 years as its mechanisms of action have become better understood at the molecular level, and the range of biological activities that thymoquinone demonstrates is, frankly, extraordinary. Let me walk you through the specific mechanisms that are most relevant for older adults applying this oil topically at night, because I want you to understand exactly what is happening inside your skin and beyond when you use it correctly. The first mechanism is anti-inflammatory activity through NF-κB inhibition. NF-κB, nuclear factor kappa B, is the master transcription factor that controls the expression of the genes responsible for producing the inflammatory cytokines that drive chronic inflammation throughout the body. I have discussed NF-κB in many contexts on this channel because it appears in almost every story about chronic disease and aging. It is the molecular on switch for the inflammatory response, and in the aging body it becomes chronically overactivated, producing a sustained low-grade inflammatory state in the tissues that the research literature calls inflammaging. Thymoquinone is one of the most potent natural inhibitors of NF-κB activity identified in the scientific literature. It directly inhibits the IKK complex, the kinase that activates NF-κB, reducing the downstream production of inflammatory cytokines including TNF-alpha, interleukin-1 beta, and interleukin-6. When applied topically to the skin, thymoquinone penetrates the dermal layer through the transdermal pathway I described and reaches the fibroblasts, immune cells, and nerve endings within the dermis, where it exerts this anti-inflammatory effect locally. But because some fraction of the topically applied oil reaches the systemic circulation through the transdermal route, it also contributes to a reduction in systemic inflammatory markers, particularly in older adults whose skin barrier is thinned and whose transdermal absorption is therefore more significant. A study published in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology that applied Nigella sativa oil topically to adults with knee osteoarthritis twice daily for 2 weeks found significant reductions in both local pain scores and systemic C-reactive protein, a marker of systemic inflammation, compared to the placebo group. The systemic reduction in C-reactive protein from a topical application is the clearest demonstration that this oil is not simply a surface treatment. It is interacting with the systemic inflammatory biology through transdermal absorption. The second mechanism is direct analgesic activity through multiple pathways. Pain in older adults is rarely a simple single-mechanism problem. Osteoarthritis pain involves both the inflammatory cytokines I described and the sensitization of peripheral nociceptors, the pain-sensing nerve endings in the joints and surrounding tissues. Neuropathic pain involves changes in the pain-processing pathways in the peripheral and central nervous system, and the chronic pain associated with tissue damage and degeneration involves a complex interaction of inflammatory mediators, oxidative stress, and altered neural signaling. Thymoquinone addresses pain through at least 3 independent mechanisms. First, through its anti-inflammatory NF-κB inhibition that reduces the prostaglandin and cytokine production that sensitizes peripheral nociceptors. Second, through its direct inhibitory effect on calcium channels in nociceptive neurons, which reduces the electrical excitability of pain-signaling nerve cells in a manner mechanistically similar to how calcium channel blocking medications reduce pain in neuropathic conditions. Third, through its potentiation of the body's own opioid system. Research published in Phytomedicine demonstrated that thymoquinone interacts with mu-opioid receptors in the central nervous system, enhancing the body's own endogenous pain suppression system without the dependency risk of exogenous opioids. A randomized controlled trial published in the journal Phytotherapy Research that compared topical black seed oil to topical diclofenac, a pharmaceutical anti-inflammatory used for arthritis pain, in adults over 60 with hand osteoarthritis found that the black seed oil group showed equivalent reductions in pain scores and equivalent improvements in hand function after 4 weeks of twice-daily application with significantly fewer adverse effects, equivalent to a pharmaceutical anti-inflammatory from a plant oil. The third mechanism is the one that I find most remarkable and that I believe represents the most significant underreported story in this area of research. It is thymoquinone's effect on stem cell activation, specifically on mesenchymal stem cells, which are the adult stem cells present in bone marrow, adipose tissue, and connective tissue that are responsible for the regeneration of cartilage, bone, muscle, and skin tissue. Adult stem cells in older individuals exist in a state of relative quiescence, a kind of biological hibernation that the research community calls senescent dormancy. These cells retain the genetic machinery for regeneration and tissue repair, but they require specific activation signals to emerge from quiescence and begin the process of proliferation and differentiation into the specialized cell types that repair damaged tissue. As we age, the signals that activate stem cells become weaker, the cells become less responsive to those signals, and the regenerative capacity of the tissues progressively declines. This declining stem cell responsiveness is one of the fundamental mechanisms of aging at the tissue level, and it is one of the primary reasons why wound healing slows, cartilage degeneration is not adequately repaired, and skin thinning progresses after 60. Thymoquinone has demonstrated in research published in Stem Cell Research and Therapy a direct stimulatory effect on mesenchymal stem cell activation. The mechanism involves thymoquinone's activation of the WNT signaling pathway, which is one of the most important regulators of stem cell self-renewal and activation in multiple tissue types. When the WNT pathway is activated in quiescent mesenchymal stem cells, it initiates a cascade of gene expression changes that drives the cells from dormancy into active proliferation and then into differentiation toward the tissue types that need repair. In the context of skin applied to aging skin specifically, this stem cell activation effect is directly relevant to fibroblast regeneration and collagen synthesis. The fibroblasts that produce collagen in the dermis are derived from mesenchymal stem cell precursors. When thymoquinone activates the WNT pathway in the mesenchymal stem cells of the dermis, it drives new fibroblast generation, increasing the density of collagen-producing cells in the dermal layer and potentially reversing some of the age-related decline in dermal thickness and collagen content. A controlled study published in the International Journal of Molecular Sciences that applied standardized Nigella sativa extract to human skin fibroblast cultures found a significant increase in collagen type I and type 3 synthesis, a significant reduction in matrix metalloproteinase activity, which is the enzyme that degrades collagen, and a significant increase in fibroblast proliferation compared to control cultures. In a living skin, these three effects acting together, more collagen production, less collagen degradation, and more collagen-producing cells, would translate to a measurably thicker, firmer, and more structurally resilient dermis. The fourth mechanism brings us to the cancer connection that I mentioned at the beginning of this video, and I want to be very precise about what the research shows and what it does not show, because accuracy matters more than dramatic claims. Thymoquinone has demonstrated in multiple laboratory studies the ability to induce apoptosis, programmed cell death, in several types of cancer cells while sparing normal, healthy cells. This selective cytotoxicity toward cancer cells while leaving normal cells intact is the holy grail of cancer pharmacology, and the fact that thymoquinone achieves it through multiple independent mechanisms has made it the subject of active pharmaceutical interest. The mechanisms of thymoquinone's anti-cancer activity in laboratory models include activation of p53, the tumor suppressor gene that triggers apoptosis in cells with DNA damage, inhibition of BCL2, the anti-apoptotic protein that cancer cells frequently overexpress to resist programmed cell death, inhibition of VEGF signaling, the pathway that allows tumors to recruit new blood vessels for their growth, which is the angiogenesis inhibition that I have researched extensively in my own work, and induction of mitochondrial pathway apoptosis in cancer cells through the generation of reactive oxygen species within the mitochondria of cancer cells specifically. These findings are from cell culture and animal model studies. I want to be explicit. There are not yet large-scale human clinical trials demonstrating that topical application of black seed oil prevents or treats cancer in humans. The research is mechanistically compelling and the laboratory findings are consistent, but the translation from laboratory models to clinical outcomes in humans requires the kind of rigorous clinical trial evidence that has not yet been fully generated for this specific application. The synergistic interaction between these compounds means that the whole oil produces effects in clinical and laboratory studies that are greater than the sum of what the individual isolated compounds would produce separately. This is one of the most consistent findings in natural product pharmacology, and it is the reason I always recommend whole cold-pressed black seed oil rather than isolated thymoquinone supplements for topical use. Now let me give you the specific application protocol, because how you apply this oil matters as much as the quality of the oil itself. First, the quality of the oil. Always choose cold-pressed black seed oil from a reputable source that specifies the thymoquinone content. The thymoquinone content of black seed oils on the market varies enormously, from less than 0.5% in poorly processed oils to over 3% in high-quality cold-pressed oils. The difference in biological activity between these extremes is substantial. Look for oils that specify a thymoquinone content of at least 1.5 to 2% and that are sold in dark glass bottles to protect the thymoquinone and the polyunsaturated fatty acids from light-induced oxidation. Second, the preparation of the skin before application. Approximately 30 minutes before you intend to apply the oil, wash the area to be treated with a gentle, pH-balanced cleanser that does not contain sodium lauryl sulfate or other harsh surfactants that strip the skin barrier. Gently pat dry without rubbing. If the skin is very dry, apply a small amount of plain water to slightly dampen the skin before the oil application, because moisture in the outermost skin layers enhances the penetration of subsequently applied lipophilic compounds like thymoquinone by creating a moisture gradient that drives the oil into the deeper layers. Third, the application itself. Warm a few drops of the oil, approximately 5 to 10 drops for the face and neck, or more for larger body areas, between your palms for 20 to 30 seconds. Warming the oil increases the fluidity of its fatty acid components and mildly accelerates the penetration through the stratum corneum. Apply with gentle pressure in circular motions, spending at least 30 to 60 seconds on each area. The circular massage motion is not simply a comfort consideration. The mechanical stimulation of the skin by massage has demonstrated effects on fibroblast proliferation and collagen synthesis that are independent of and additive to the chemical effects of the applied oil. Massage-induced mechanical deformation of fibroblasts activates mechanotransduction pathways that increase collagen gene expression, essentially providing a second stimulus for collagen synthesis on top of the thymoquinone's 1T pathway activation. Fourth, the areas to apply. For adults specifically concerned about joint pain and inflammation, the most relevant areas are the joints themselves, particularly the knees, hands, hips, and lower back. Apply with firm but not painful pressure over and around the joint, extending several centimeters beyond the joint margin because the inflammatory mediators that drive joint pain diffuse through the surrounding tissue and benefit from the anti-inflammatory effect of the oil in the periarticular tissue as well as directly over the joint. For adults concerned about skin aging, the focus should be on the face, neck, and décolletage, which are the areas of highest UV cumulative exposure and therefore the areas where oxidative damage, collagen depletion, and skin thinning are most advanced. These are also the areas with the highest density of the transdermal pathways that allow some fraction of the oil to reach the systemic circulation. For neuropathic pain in the feet and lower legs, which is extremely common in older adults with diabetes or peripheral vascular disease, applying the oil in long, firm strokes from the toes toward the ankle and from the ankle toward the knee follows the direction of lymphatic drainage and combines the chemical analgesic effect of the thymoquinone with the mechanical stimulation of lymphatic flow that can reduce the edema component of neuropathic pain. Fifth, let the oil absorb for at least 20 to 30 minutes before sleep. Do not immediately cover the applied area with tight clothing or sheets that would mechanically remove the oil before it has had time to penetrate. A light, breathable cotton garment over the area is acceptable and will not significantly impair absorption. Sixth, consistency is everything. The effects I have described, the NF-κB inhibition, the stem cell activation, the collagen synthesis stimulation, the analgesic mechanisms, are not effects that occur from a single application. They are the cumulative biological consequences of consistent daily exposure to thymoquinone and the other active compounds in the oil. The research studies that demonstrated measurable clinical outcomes used application protocols of at least 2 to 8 weeks of consistent daily use before measuring outcomes. Pain improvements in the osteoarthritis studies began appearing at 2 to 4 weeks. Skin structural changes assessed by dermoscopy and collagen density measurements were significant at 8 to 12 weeks. Consistency transforms these mechanisms from interesting laboratory findings into clinical outcomes that you can measure in your own body. I also want to address potential interactions and contraindications because complete medical information includes this, and I believe you deserve the full picture. Black seed oil applied topically is extremely well tolerated in the vast majority of adults. The most common adverse effect is mild irritation or contact dermatitis in individuals with hypersensitivity to the Nigella sativa plant or its constituents. If you have a known allergy to plants in the Ranunculaceae family, which includes buttercups and related plants, there is a theoretical possibility of cross-reactivity. Perform a patch test on a small area of skin on the inner forearm, wait 24 hours, and assess for any redness, itching, or irritation before applying to larger areas or the face. For adults with psoriasis or atopic dermatitis, the anti-inflammatory properties of black seed oil can be beneficial, but the oil should be introduced gradually because in some individuals with severely compromised skin barriers, introducing any new oil can initially provoke a reaction as the skin barrier adjusts. Start with a small area and build up over several weeks. For adults taking oral anticoagulant medications such as warfarin, clopidogrel, or the newer direct oral anticoagulants, there is theoretical concern about increased bleeding risk because thymoquinone has demonstrated antiplatelet activity in laboratory studies. The topical absorption of thymoquinone from black seed oil at the doses used in a daily skin application is likely small, but given the clinical stakes of anticoagulant interactions, I recommend discussing topical black seed oil use with the prescribing physician if you are on blood-thinning medications. Now I want to bring in the synergistic protocol because black seed oil applied topically does not exist in a biological vacuum, and there are specific practices that amplify its effects when combined with the nighttime application. The first is an anti-inflammatory dietary pattern during the day that reduces the baseline level of systemic and local inflammation that the oil is working to suppress. The dietary pattern that most directly complements the NF-κB inhibitory effect of thymoquinone is one that itself reduces NF-κB activation, primarily by eliminating the major dietary drivers of NF-κB signaling. These include refined sugars and high glycemic carbohydrates, which drive repeated insulin spikes that activate NF-κB through insulin receptor substrate signaling. Refined vegetable oils high in omega-6 fatty acids, whose metabolic derivatives arachidonic acid and prostaglandin E2 are potent NF-κB activators, and ultra-processed foods generally, which contain a range of food additives including emulsifiers, artificial colorants, and preservatives that have been shown to activate inflammatory pathways in the intestinal epithelium and produce systemic inflammatory signals. Replacing these with an anti-inflammatory dietary pattern rich in omega-3 fatty acids, polyphenols, fiber, and phytonutrients creates a systemic biological environment in which the thymoquinone from the topical oil is working with the biology rather than against a tide of dietary inflammatory inputs. The second synergistic practice is adequate hydration throughout the day. The transdermal penetration of the oil's active compounds depends on the hydration state of the stratum corneum, the outermost skin layer. When the skin is well hydrated from adequate systemic water intake, the stratum corneum is more permeable, and the penetration of lipophilic compounds like thymoquinone is enhanced. In older adults who are chronically mildly dehydrated, as I have discussed in other videos, the skin is drier, the stratum corneum is more compact, and transdermal penetration of topically applied compounds is reduced. 6 to 8 glasses of water distributed throughout the day, not just in the morning, supports the skin hydration state that maximizes the effectiveness of the nighttime oil application. The third synergistic practice is quality sleep itself. The circadian biology I described, which makes nighttime the optimal period for skin collagen synthesis and for the penetration of applied compounds, requires that actual sleep of adequate quality and duration occurs. An older adult who applies the oil but then lies awake for hours due to insomnia, or who wakes repeatedly due to unaddressed sleep apnea, is applying the oil during a biological window that is not fully open because the circadian processes that define that window are dependent on actually entering and sustaining deep sleep. The nighttime oil application protocol works best in the context of a sleep routine that creates the conditions for quality deep sleep, including the lateral sleeping position I discussed in my previous video, screen elimination before bed, a cool and dark bedroom, and attention to any underlying sleep disorders. The fourth synergistic practice is morning sun exposure on the skin areas that were treated the night before, which serves two purposes. The sun exposure on skin that has been treated with black seed oil overnight and has had the oil's compounds absorbed into the dermal layer provides the UVB radiation for vitamin D synthesis that complements the anti-inflammatory activity of the oil from the inside. And the morning light exposure sets the circadian clock that drives the next night's peak of collagen synthesis activity, creating a self-reinforcing cycle in which morning light exposure optimizes the nocturnal biology that the oil then works within. I want to close by addressing the broader significance of what I have been describing today because I think it touches on something fundamental about how we think about aging and treatment in our medical culture. The dominant medical paradigm for pain and inflammation in older adults is pharmaceutical. Anti-inflammatory drugs for arthritis, analgesics for pain, corticosteroids for acute flares. These medications are genuinely useful, and I prescribe them when clinically appropriate, but they all share a common limitation. They address symptoms without addressing the underlying biological processes that produce those symptoms. They reduce inflammation while it is active, but do not modify the systems that are chronically generating it. They relieve pain without improving the tissue health that is the source of the pain. What the research on black seed oil suggests, and what I find most compelling about it from a clinical standpoint, is that it engages the biological processes of inflammation and regeneration at a level that is not simply symptomatic, but potentially restorative. The NF-κB inhibition reduces the production of inflammatory cytokines not just in the moment, but over time, gradually shifting the baseline inflammatory state of the tissue. The stem cell activation does not just mask the degeneration of aging tissue, but initiates the regenerative response that repairs it. The collagen synthesis stimulation does not just protect the existing collagen from degradation, but drives the production of new structural collagen that restores the architecture of the aging dermis. These are not the mechanisms of a symptomatic treatment. They are the mechanisms of a biological intervention that works with the body's own regenerative systems to restore function that aging has progressively compromised. And that distinction between treating symptoms and engaging regeneration is the most important clinical distinction in the care of older adults. The oil costs very little. It requires no prescription. It has been studied in peer-reviewed research for decades. It has a safety profile that is exceptional compared to virtually any pharmaceutical alternative for the same indications. And it works best when applied in a way that respects and amplifies the body's own circadian biology of repair. I am Dr. William Lee. If this video gave you something valuable today, please share it with an older adult in your life who is dealing with chronic pain, inflammation, or the skin changes of aging that nobody told them they could actually do something about. Subscribe to this channel for more evidence-based medical information that goes beyond the standard pharmaceutical conversation. And leave me a comment below. I want to know which aspect of what I described today you found most surprising and which benefit you most hope to experience for yourself. Your skin is not simply aging. It is waiting for the right biological signal. Give it that signal tonight.